Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, I'm sure we've all heard political leaders on the left insisting that no one is above the law. And while I applaud this stated commitment to judicial integrity, well, I can't help but to wonder, why are the same progressive leaders constantly running cover for their criminal comrades? For example, why haven't we seen an investigation and convictions of Jeffrey Epstein's so-called client list? We know that Epstein was guilty of engaging in child trafficking, and we know that he had a client list of powerful people who spent their time on his island, and yet his secret list of clients is being protected by the progressives while the mainstream media continues to bury the story. And yet at the same time, they continue to insist that no one is above the law. Well, no one except for Epstein's pedophile friends. And how about Quid Pro Joe, the former vice president of the United States who openly confessed that he used $1 billion of U.S. tax money as leverage to remove a top Ukrainian prosecutor who just so happened to be investigating the corruption within the company that just so happened to be paying his son, Hunter, to occupy a seat on their board. Yeah, nothing to see here, just another day in the life of the Biden family. And listen, the evidence of this corruption was found on Hunter Biden's infamous laptop. I'll remind you, it was just before the 2020 election when the New York Post first broke this story about Hunter's laptop, but rather than engaging in an investigation, that's when big tech, the mainstream media, and even some in our intelligence community, they immediately started running cover for the Bidens by insisting that this, was nothing more than, Russian election interference. Well, as it turns out, the laptop did belong to Hunter Biden, and while Hunter Biden previously refused to admit that the laptop was his, well, he's since changed his tune and is now suing former Mayor Rudy Giuliani for allegedly manipulating and destroying data, which apparently resulted in the total annihilation of Hunter's digital privacy. Yeah, no one is above the law. Well, except for Hunter Biden. Over the past year, people have had access to nearly 130,000 emails from Hunter's laptop, many of which are emails that purportedly place President Biden directly in the middle of his son's foreign business deals. This includes a conversation between Hunter and the son of a Mexican billionaire in which Biden's son admits to giving the recipients access to the White House and the vice president. And while the Democrats continue to run cover for this corruption, they still love to insist that no one's above the law. Well, if that's really the case, then what about Hillary Clinton's decision to abandon 4 Americans in Benghazi, where they were then murdered by terrorists? Or what about Hillary's decision to mishandle highly classified information, resulting in more than 90 security violations? And why did the FBI agents agree to destroy specific laptops, all the while knowing that the contents were the subject of congressional subpoenas and preservation letters? Oh, and let's not forget about the questions regarding Hillary's involvement in the so-called Steele dossier, which actually gave way to the Russian collusion hoax, which seems to have been the DNC's attempt to manipulate the 2016 election so that Hillary could be the president. And yet, despite all of the evidence that supports these allegations, Hillary continues to walk free, with her impeached husband, who supposedly also spent time on Epstein's island. How about former Attorney General Eric Holder, who misled Congress during their investigation of Obama's Fast and Furious gun-running scandal, which, remember, was a use of taxpayer dollars to place guns into the hands of the Mexican cartels. And while it's true that Holder was held in contempt of the court, still, everyone involved in this scandal should be tried for treason, not just contempt of court, but treason, and according to federal law. As a matter of fact, it's Title 18, U.S. Code 2381. That's where we read this, and I quote, "Whoever, owing allegiance to the United States, levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Now think about that for a moment. Anyone, and especially including those who have taken office and sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and then goes on to levy war against the United States by giving aid to our enemies, well, these people are guilty of treason and they have to suffer the consequences. Therefore, everyone in the Obama administration who helped run guns to Mexican cartels, they should be tried for treason and they should be punished according to the law. And so if it's true that no one is above the law, well, then why hasn't there been any convictions for this act of treason? Or how about the crimes that are currently being committed at our southern border as thousands of illegal immigrants present frivolous asylum claims each and every day? Rather than being rejected according to the law, the Biden administration rewards those who illegally falsify asylum claims. And while they insist that no one's above the law, they continue to reward those who are entering the U.S. under false pretense. How about the crimes committed by those who falsified the data regarding the Wuhan virus or the clot shot? For example, Fauci and Collins were both aware of the gain-of-function research happening there in Wuhan, and yet they went on to accuse those who exposed this story of being conspiracy theorists. And while they pretended like they were trying to figure out the origins of the virus, was it a bat? Was it a pangolin? Was it a snake? Meanwhile, the pandemic was spreading and people were dying. And so again, tell me how no one's above the law. In similar fashion, the so-called vaccine was rolled out as our government assured us that it's safe and effective. And yet, internal emails from the CDC revealed that they were already aware of the links between COVID-19 vaccines and the myocarditis that could be an adverse reaction to the shot. And they were aware of this as early as May 2021. That's right. They knew about this adverse reaction, and yet they decided to withhold this information for more than a year. And it was actually last November when a CDC study finally revealed that the COVID mRNA shots increased the risk of developing myocarditis more than 13,000%. That's right. If you receive the safe and effective mRNA shots, you're increasing the risk of developing myocarditis by more than 13,000%. And listen, it was back in January of this year when cardiac testing at a public event in Washington, Oregon revealed the reality of a 53% myocarditis rate in COVID vaccine recipients. That being the case, we ought to be asking, what should we do with all of these health experts who promised that the vaccines were safe and effective while simultaneously hiding the data about these adverse reactions like myocarditis? The reason I ask is because of a scientific study which was published last December. It was published in the journal Clinical Research in Cardiology. And according to the data in this study, at least 20% of people who suddenly died after getting vaccinated for COVID, they developed myocarditis before dying. And if this truly is the case, then 1 in 5 of the fully jabbed people who suddenly died, they initially developed this inflammatory heart condition shortly after the injection. And with that being the case, if it's true that no one is above the law, then when do we start conducting the new Nuremberg trials? When will we begin to prosecute those who led millions of Americans to engage in a medical experiment, all the while knowing that there was clear evidence of life-threatening adverse reactions for those who rolled up the sleeve and received this safe and effective vaccine? Listen, if nobody is above the law, then why are so many criminals continuing to enjoy the wealth that they acquired throughout all of these criminal endeavors? And if nobody is above the law, then why are we failing to punish those who actively engage in the abortion industry, which has terminated the lives of more than 60 million preborn persons since the 70s? Clearly, those on the progressive left actually believe that they are above the law. And yet I can assure you that this is not going to play out well in the highest court of heaven. To prove my point, let's consider the way that the Apostle John described the judgment throne of Jesus Christ. It's in Revelation chapter 20. There, John declares, "I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it. from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and anyone not found in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. According to John, there's coming a day when every unrepentant unbeliever will be brought before the judgment throne of Jesus Christ. And it's at that point in time when the Lord will begin to open up the books which contain a complete record of every sin that unrepentant unbelievers have ever committed. And the Lord is going to pass a perfect judgment for every single sin. Then they're going to be cast into the lake of fire, where they're going to spend eternity serving their sentence. What this means then is that the crimes of every unbeliever will eventually be punished there in the lake of fire. And the reason why is because no one is above the law. At the same time, we can also rejoice in knowing that Jesus Christ came and received the punishment that we deserve so that he can remain just and at the same time become the justifier of those who will repent and trust in him. That being the case, let's encourage every unbeliever to repent and trust in Jesus Christ so that they can receive the grace of God by which we are saved from the condemnation of the law. And with this as the goal, let's ask the Lord to help us and empower us so that we can continue to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.